Alright, analyzing and interpreting the Tao of Jeet Kune by Bruce Lee. I'm on page number 17. One can function freely and totally if he is beyond system. The man who is really serious with the urge to find out what truth is has no style at all. He lives only in what is. So he's talking about, once again, freeing yourself from being limited by systems. And when he's talking about systems, he's talking about all systems, including his own. But his is not supposed to be a system, but people have turned it into a system. So if there ever is such a thing as a Jeet Kune school out there, it's not a real school. It's not a legitimate school. It's not an authentic school. It's a false school. But even if you join a Jeet Kune school, he's even talking about that system. He's talking about the boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA, cage fighting, Aikido, Krav Maga. Any type of system out there is imposing limitations upon you. So he's saying to be free from all systems, to free yourself from all limitations. Because every single system will impose their own limitations on what you can and can't do during a certain engagement. And if you notice that all systems have usually some sort of promotion towards their sport. Taekwondo has Olympic Taekwondo sparring. They train for the Olympic Games. Judo has their games in the Olympics. Even fencing has their games. Kendo has their games. Wrestling has their games. Boxing has their games. Every single style has some sort of game that they engage in order to take their emphasis out of street combat and into the realm of sport. Cage fighting is a game. Boxing is a game. So he's saying that when you're not bound by any of these styles or any of these systems, you're truly free to respond to the situation at hand and to defend yourself accordingly. And he's saying that that's going to be the ultimate way of survival, is when you have no limitations on any that is imposed by any system. If you want to understand the truth in martial arts, to see any opponent clearly, you must throw away the notion of styles or schools, prejudices, likes and dislikes, and so forth. Then your mind will cease all conflict and come to rest. In this silence you will see totally and freshly. Alright, so he's saying that whatever you learn in martial arts, you need to drop that. You need to drop that ego identification to what you're learning. And you need to empty your cup, basically. You know, you might start off with an empty cup and then it gets full through years and years of training this and that and whatever. You train all these different things and your cup gets really full. And then you walk around interpreting situations based on the fullness of your cup, based on the knowledge that you've accumulated. He's saying that you need to empty your cup and just see everything fresh as is, without likes and dislikes and prejudices and things like that. So you're supposed to essentially start off with no training, which everybody has no training, and then you train, and then you have to drop that training and get back to the state of no mind, back to the natural state in meditation, responding to the situation with inbuilt training that's not held back by the mind. It's just spontaneous. If any style teaches you a method of fighting, then you might be able to fight according to the limit of that method. but that is not actually fighting. So, talking about a method of fighting, it's like boxing. Boxing is a method of fighting. And in that method, there's a lot of limitations. The limitations are extremely apparent, more apparent than the cage fighting, because, it's clear they can't kick at all. They can't elbow, they can't headbutt, they can't knee. And on top of that, they gotta wear gloves, they gotta wear protection. There's no low blows. I mean, it's just an immense amount of limitations. But if you look at any single combat sport, you'll see the limitations in there. Even Muay Thai has a lot of limitations. For example, there's no takedowns. All of them, across all boards, including MMA, disallow weapons, for sure. All of them disallow like multiple opponents, having your friend jump in to help you out. But limitations in cage fighting are a little bit more, harder to see, harder to identify, because you need more training in order to see the limitations. But it'll be, okay, they're allowed to kick, they're allowed to punch, they're allowed to elbow, they're allowed to knee. But, for example, they're not allowed to wear shoes. They're still wearing gloves, even though the gloves are smaller, they're still wearing them. There's certain chokes that they're not allowed to do. There's certain pressure points they're not allowed to use. There's no biting. There's no stomping. You can't stomp your opponent, You can't hit the person in the back of the head. You can't hit him in the back of the neck. You can't, you can't pull his hair. You can't pull his ears. You can't even scream at the person. You can't even talk trash to the person. You can't even aggravate the person by, saying racist things or be completely disrespectful. You can't spit on the person. You can't fish hook them, they say. You can't eye gouge them. I mean, there's an immense amount of limitations in cage fighting, but you just need a lot more experience in the martial arts to actually see all those limitations. Of course, in addition to all the weapons that you cannot use, there's no jabs to the eye. You can't even jab them to the eye, for example. So, like, every single combat sport will have their limitations, and they will train you according to their method revolved around those limitations. So, you might be able to fight according to the limit of that method, like, a cage fighter who's been training for many years to fight in a cage, yeah, he could fight in a cage. But you take him outside of that cage, you put him into the real world, he's going to be very much handicapped, because there's a lot of things that he's not going to be trained in, compared to somebody like a Bruce Lee or somebody that truly trains with no limitations. Now, you compare the cage fighter to the average person that doesn't train in anything. Of course, he's going to seem like he's a superhuman, robotic fighter that is indestructible. But I'm saying his method is not the ultimate, because if you put the same motivation, the same drive into another person who trains with no limitations, then his method is going to be completely demolishing the method of the cage fighter, because his method has no limitations. So it's like putting a cage fighter, for example, against a highly trained police officer that's trained in everything. Police officer has a gun, he has taser, he has baton, he has knives, he has his backup, buddies that he could call. He's got his radio, he's got his car, he's got his AR-15, he's got a bulletproof vest, he's got all this technology. In addition, he has shoes on, he doesn't have to wear boxing gloves, he's allowed to take your life away if he needs to. He could do anything he wants to protect himself from the cage fighter. What does the cage fighter have on the streets? Nothing. No weapons, no shoes. He has a mouth guard, he has gloves on. He probably doesn't even have a shirt on. You know, he has all these rules of things that that he's not allowed to do. All the police officer has to do, he could use his gun to shoot the cage fighter to death. He could use his taser, he could use his baton, he could use his knife to stab the cage fighter. He could stomp on the cage fighter. He could do whatever he wants to protect himself. That's just an example of somebody that has no limits. You know, he could do whatever he needs to do to survive the situation. You know, the cage fighter has absolutely no chance when it comes to comparing the sciences of what is most effective for survival. So just notice that when we're in danger and we really need help because, say, a woman's getting raped, or there's an armed robbery in the bank, or you're getting robbed for your car, you don't call the cage fighter for help. You don't call the professional boxer for help. You call the police officers because they're trained, not necessarily trained that elite, but they have the tools. They have the resources. You know, even if the officer's engaged in a combat situation with a cage fighter, he could call his buddies, call his backup, and then the backup comes and help. So in street combat, that's what it's like. It's like there's no rules, there's no limitations. So you might have a cage fighter who might be great at fighting in a cage. He gets in an altercation with somebody at the bar, at the club, or wherever, at the gas station, and the next thing you know, the person that he has an altercation with pulls out a gun, pulls out a knife, or his friend jumps in. His friend jumps in with the gun, shoots the cage fighter to death. I mean, this is the reality of combat. That is, this is how it really is. There's no limitations when it comes to survival. And that's kind of what Bruce is talking about. It's like there's no method. If any style teaches you a method of fighting, you might be able to fight according to the limit of that method, but that's not actually fighting. Actually fighting is just my life against your life. We're gonna fight to death. It's not about, how much money you're getting paid and signing contracts and, making the crowd happy and pleased. It's your life against, the person that's trying to hurt you. Like a woman who's at home sleeping, and then somebody breaks in, and then his objective is to rape and kill her. It's not about glory or winning titles and belts and winning money. It's just about surviving that moment, and she's going to have to do whatever it takes to survive that moment. You can't tell her that she can't hit the person in the back of the head. You can't tell her that, you can't eye gouge the person, you can't scream at the person, you can't spit on the person, you can't, you gotta take off your shoes before you fight them. I mean, it's just, it's a bunch of nonsense, when it comes to combat sport. They're not really teaching you the real survival methods. You gotta do whatever it takes. She might have to grab the gun and shoot and kill the person. I mean, this is real life. If you meet the unconventional attack, such as one delivered with a broken rhythm, with your chosen patterns of rhythmical classical blocks, your defense and counterattack will always be lacking pliability and aliveness. Now in this one, I could see him talking about like the traditional karate people that practice back in his time, like, these ineffective techniques that are unbroken rhythm. But I think a lot of the combat sport people nowadays, they're trained to have broken rhythm. Back then they weren't. There weren't that many people that knew how to, that were that, they were not that effective in sparring, and there's just a lot of nonsense that they're doing. You could clearly see, like, how terrible their techniques were, how predictable it was, how telegraphic. And he's basically talking about how, your stuff will not work against a person who has broken rhythm, who knows how to move and block and just very fluid. But I think nowadays, over 40 years after his death, there's a lot of people that know how to fight with broken rhythm. So many different boxers and fighters, and it's something that's simple now that a lot of people can do. It's way beyond the time of proving the ineffectiveness of people that fight with unbroken rhythm. Now it's more about proving the ineffectiveness of unarmed combat in general, altogether, compared to combat with weapons or combat on the streets. So if you follow the classical pattern, you are understanding the routine, the tradition, the shadow. You are not understanding yourself. Okay, so if you follow the classical pattern, you're understanding the routine, the tradition, the shadow. You're not understanding yourself. Now, I understand where he's coming from. Now, but you gotta put into context when he was saying this. This was over 40 years ago. And you're talking about a classical pattern. You're understanding the routine, the tradition, the shadow. So imagine you're in China and you got everybody's Chinese, everybody. Billions of Chinese people everywhere. And then you got like 2,000 monks practicing a certain routine. And they're all being rhythmic and they're all practicing in sync in these forms that Bruce is labeling as ineffective and military. It's like militaristic. You're just bringing everybody together, doing the same thing, and it's a tradition, it's a routine, it's a shadow. But you're living in China. These monks are living in China. They're already rooted into their tradition. They're born there, raised there. The whole culture is already Chinese. There's nothing new. There's no individuality. There's nothing to protect because it's already so much of it. So it's like so much of it that the value goes down. So meaning, like say you go to the grocery store and then there's thousands of bananas. Then, okay, if you're looking for something else, you can't find it because all you find is bananas and there's thousands of them. So there's just so many people doing the same thing that it brings the value down. And then somebody like Bruce could step in there and be like, this is not unique. Everything's just the same. Just like the monks, all their heads are shaved, they're all wearing the same clothes, and there's thousands of them. But then there's only one Bruce Lee, because he refused to just, he refused to become a part of that mold. He wanted to represent something different. So Rather than having 10,000 bananas at the grocery store, Bruce Lee's like the one apple, and then there's no other apples except for him, and then there's 10,000 bananas. So, of course, you can understand that, but now you bring it to this time now in America. We're not in China anymore. So you cannot go to America and then find 10,000 monks practicing a form, a routine, and promoting their tradition. You barely even find any Chinese people on the streets. And if you do find a Chinese person on the streets, chances are he doesn't even train in martial arts, knows nothing about martial arts. Chances are he's forgotten about his history, his heritage. Chances are he's mixed. He doesn't even know his language. You know, he's not even full Chinese. He's like half white, half black, half Hispanic or whatever. He's maybe like 1/4 Chinese. He can't speak it, can't read it, can't do anything with it. Like, he's gone so far away from his culture that he's not really Chinese anymore. So first off, you come to America, you can't even find Chinese people. When you do find them, they don't even practice martial arts. And then they don't speak the language. They can't write it, they can't read it. They're pretty much not even Chinese. So then to find a real Chinese martial arts school in America, it's like trying to find a diamond at the beach. Like, you just can't find it. You give up hope. So, but what do you find? You find boxing everywhere, you find wrestling everywhere, you find individuality everywhere. Everybody, when it comes to being a boxer, you're fighting for yourself. Nobody else matters except for you. It's not a team sport. It's just you. And when it's just you, it just becomes highly egoistic. It's just, you don't care about anybody but yourself. It's a very selfish sport. Same thing with wrestling. And America is like the opposite of China. It's like they overvalue individuality and they undervalue cooperation and teamwork and family. I mean, you even see it, that's why when people get older, they just get thrown into nursing homes. Like, there's no family dynamic. Broken family, the father's not even around. Like, probably over 90% of households don't even have a father around. Broken households, older people get thrown into nursing homes. We got an individualistic culture where it's all about me, me, me. It's not about teamwork and working together. But in China, it might be the opposite, where it's a stronger family unit, there's less divorces. When they have the martial arts schools, they work together in unison. It's not just about me, me, me. It's less ego. That's the traditional. Maybe China's become more westernized and maybe they're becoming more American and individual and egoistic and things like that. But so if you take it to the context of today, it's almost necessary for a martial arts school, a Chinese martial arts school, to retain their tradition, their routines, their culture. Because if they don't, and they don't retain it, then they cease to become a Chinese martial arts school. It just becomes a regular martial arts school or a combat sports school or just another gym just to join that has no culture behind it, no tradition, no history. There's nothing unique. So then you go to China, there's 10,000 bananas in the store. You come to America, you go to the grocery store, you can't even find one banana. You go to 20 different grocery stores, you can't find one banana, but you find thousands of apples, millions of apples. So millions of people that are trying to be like Bruce Lee, millions of people that want to go into acting, to be an actor like Bruce, millions of people practicing combat sport so they could be the best like Bruce. millions of people that just care about themselves. They don't care about the next person. So it's flipped. In America, there's millions of apples, no bananas. In China, at least back in the time of Bruce, thousands of bananas, no apples. Now, over 40 years later, it's flipped. So now, what's important is to retain the traditions, the routines, because it's desperately needed at this time, at this day. So, especially with the cage fighting and the combat sport, almost everybody, there's the big majority of the people out there know how to fight. Because even if you don't do even if you don't do cage fighting or practice martial arts, almost everybody wrestles. And wrestling has become proven to be an effective method of fighting. So it's just like everybody knows how to fight now. But has been lost are the traditions, the culture, the history. Like, that has been lost. And that's what needs to be retained in a martial arts school. And that's what's missing. So essentially, yes, I see the truth in Bruce's teachings, but at this time, today, we need to put more emphasis into building a family dynamic within the martial arts where you're watching out for each other, you're helping each other progress as a unit to improve. Of course, you need to understand yourself. You need to understand yourself. But I think we live in America, living in America, we are so much we're such an individualistic culture that how could you not focus on that? It's already a part of you. So we need to learn the other part, which is working with other people. And that's what makes a martial arts school unique, is when they can retain the beauty of culture and tradition that's passed away so long ago and bring it into modern society. There's something beautiful about going into like a Chinatown, for example. They have one in Chicago. They got a few in California. They got a few in New York. But there's not that many Chinatowns in America. And those are highly valuable, places of interest, because it's just, you're stepping into a different culture when you get into that community. That needs to be retained. Because you could go to anywhere and find a McDonald's, find a Burger King, find a bunch of Americans eating junk food and speaking English and, nothing new. Everything's the same everywhere you go. But when you go into Chinatown, they're speaking a different language. They're living a different life. They're writing differently. They're reading differently. They value different things. They watch different channels in the TV. They look different. They act different. Their food is different. It becomes very unique because it's so different. But if you go to China, the entire country is a Chinatown, so there's nothing unique. And then the American becomes unique in China. But if you live in America, you become unique when you are Chinese. because there's no Chinese people around here. And not just being Chinese, but you could be a white person, a black person, Hispanic person. If you know how to read Chinese and speak Chinese, you become extremely unique in America, because even Chinese people in America don't even read and write it. But then you, being black, white, or Hispanic, you can read and write Chinese, and the Chinese people in America can't even do what you can do. That becomes unique. So you go anywhere in America, you find a bunch of boxers, a bunch of wrestlers, a bunch of football players, a bunch of tennis players, basketball players, but you will rarely ever find a kung fu artist, because that is very rare in America, and that needs to be retained and protected. At this time, over 40 years after the death of Bruce Lee. So what I'm saying is we need to have both. Bruce is talking about using the martial arts as a way of understanding yourself, to not get too caught up, to not get so caught up in promoting a system, promoting a tradition, and becoming a shadow of somebody else. He's saying you gotta be your own person. Do your own thing. Don't become somebody else's shadow. Yes, I completely agree. We need that. Every human being needs that. But I'm also indicating that we cannot drop the other side of it. We need to retain the traditions. We need to retain the ability to follow and be a shadow to our elders, to those who are wise. We need to have both. We need to have cooperation. We need to build a family. But then yes, we need to make time for ourselves as well. So it's like being a parent. You can't just abandon your child and just be like, it's all about me now. No, you decide to have this child, you gotta be here for the child. Be there for the child. But then also make time for yourself. Because that's important. That's really important, because without taking care of yourself, how are you gonna take care of your child? You need to take care of yourself in order to be healthy enough to take care of the child. So we need both. Bruce is indicating one point. I'm indicating the other point. Let's have both. So, what is so wrong with practicing forms and techniques and something fixed and choreographed, and then at the same time being able to spar spontaneously and defend yourself in a deadly situation? What's so wrong with having both? Why be limited and just be able to just defend yourself, but then you don't know no forms, you don't know anything that's choreographed, you don't know any routines, you don't know anything other than just spontaneous fighting, you don't know nothing else? What's so wrong with learning those, of having both? I see the value in it, and I feel that people need to see the benefits of both. There is a beauty to practicing a certain routine that's been created over 1,000 years ago, and then it's been the same, and you actually know that routine. There's something beautiful of reading the Tao of Jeet, which was created over 2,500 years ago, reading it today and it being retained, than to just right now just log into the internet and just read an article that was just written like 2 minutes ago, or see somebody's Twitter that was just posted 2 seconds ago. There's something beautiful about retaining that traditional knowledge that died hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, or even just over 40 years ago. There's something beautiful of retaining something from the past and not just burning it all. Imagine if we just burn these books, burn all books, and we're just focused on what's created right now and nothing else. There's something beautiful of the past. From Socrates to Lao Tzu to Jesus to Buddha to Bruce Lee to Osho, there's something beautiful there that needs to be retained. And of course, the modern expression with the YouTube, with the Twitter, with the Facebook, with the internet and the cell phones and the text messaging. There's the modern, there's the traditional. I see no conflict in embracing both. During Bruce's time, there's too much traditional and he needs to bring in the modern. During this time, there's too much modern. We need to bring back the traditional. We need to bring them both together.